Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain. Welcome to this special presentation, Beyond Resilience, Transforming Supply Chain Challenges into Opportunities, presented by Coupa. Quick reminder, there will be an audience question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. So, in today's unpredictable world, adaptive supply chains are a strategic necessity. So this session is going to explore the core principles of adaptive supply chains, including antifragility, scenario planning, and AI-driven insights. We're going to showcase how businesses can turn disruption into opportunities and gain a competitive advantage. With that, I want to introduce our speakers for today. Nuno Andrade is a global supply chain network optimization manager at SLB. Nuno is a mechanical engineer from Portugal who has spent over 20 years at the company. Throughout his career at SLB, he's held various roles across multiple countries and continents, including supply chain design, demand planning, materials management, and project and field engineer. Nari Viswanathan is Senior Director of Supply Chain Strategy at Coupa, where he manages the go-to-market strategies for supply chain and direct spend areas. Over the past 20 years, Nari has held VP and Director of Product Management, Research, and Marketing roles at various companies. Welcome to both of you. So with that, I'd like to toss the presentation over to Nari. Nari's going to tell us a little bit about this presentation. Thank you. And Nari, take it away.
Thank you, Bob, and thanks to everybody who is at this session today. We really appreciate it. The focus of what we want to cover today is really practical and deep insights on how companies can benefit from being adaptive. And if you really think about why should companies be adaptive and what's the cost and benefit, it really boils down to the fact that so many disruptions are happening today: geopolitical risks, weather events, increase of costs due to inflation, and so on. There's about 1.6 trillion in revenue growth opportunity left on the table from disruptions for all of the companies globally. And those companies which are resilient, they're able to capture significantly more revenue than their less resilient competitors. So the focus on resiliency is very important today. And if you really think about why are some of these risks, or what are some of these risks that companies face, I think we can really think about it in three different buckets. First is the fact that there are external factors or external events which are happening, which makes supply chains more fragile. So supply chains today have an increased exposure to risk. And the reason why they have this increased exposure to risk is because of the processes today which are very rigid and having single points of failures. For example, having a single source supplier and being very reactionary, not having the agility to respond to events as they happen. The second area where companies are struggling with is the fact that they are very fragmented. And there's a firefighting culture. So supply chains are not still very strategic. They're really focused on day-to-day firefighting. Functional areas are siloed with each other, inhibiting the visibility across functional groups. Systems are very disparate with each other, and those systems are not connected with each other, resulting in more of localized decision making. Essentially, what you're seeing is lack of connection between operational planning and the financial planning. So companies are not able to maximize their margins because they don't have visibility to the spend within their supply chain. They don't have the ability to make the right decisions. Then the third area of focus is really in terms of being imbalanced in terms of objectives. So companies are always facing conflicting objectives. So they are seeing the fact that the costs are increasing, the sales are reducing, and of course there are no external factors with tariffs and so on. And the way by which they're trying to solve the problem today is still trying to find a solution which is just feasible and not optimal. If you have a solution which is optimal, you can really make more revenue. So that's a big gap that companies have. So how can we resolve these gaps? Is essentially through the notion of adaptive supply chain. So what we call as adaptive supply chain has got really three different buckets to it, or three different components to it. The first area is in terms of being anti-fragile. When we say companies should be anti-fragile, is really like the next step in terms of being resilient. It's no longer sufficient that companies are resilient. The company should focus on being anti-fragile. What we mean by this is having the strength through stress. So having not only the resilience to the shocks, but also being able to gain competitive advantage from being exposed to those shocks. That's what we mean by anti-fragility. The middle component that we encourage companies to focus on is in being integrated in terms of connecting all of their ecosystems. So when you talk about ecosystems, it's your suppliers, your customers, your distribution providers, your transportation and logistics providers, connecting all of them and looking at an end-to-end visibility and really having a collaborative ecosystem. How can you achieve that? Is really through capabilities that we'll be talking about through some of the practical examples later in this presentation. And then the focus on trying to, whenever you do the planning, link it back to the financial aspects through integrated business planning. So unifying your financial and operational planning through integrated business planning. And then the third element, which is last but not the least, is really focusing on optimization. Today we have, with the growth of AI and hyperscale cloud systems, companies can now run very large models and run those models to be able to come up with optimal solutions at a much faster rate. The advantage of having optimization is that your operations will be much more efficient. And whenever you make a decision, you can really test it out in the virtual world before you make the decision in the real world, which is really what we call as scenario-based decision making. So the ability to have these different scenarios that you can run and ensure that when you run those scenarios, find out which scenarios are the optimal for you and really identify the impact of the scenarios is something which is very essential for companies today. So with this, I wanted to hand it over to you, Bob, to have our panel discussion.
Thanks very much, Nari, for setting the stage for our discussion today. Let me start out, again, welcome to both you and Nuno, but I want to start asking Nuno if you could give us a brief introduction to SLB about its supply chain, its scale and complexity, because you are indeed a massive operation with unique demands. And so tell me about your supply chain and what makes it so complex, Nuno?
Yeah, for sure. And first of all, thanks for having us. I hope that everybody is okay on the other side of the line. So, indeed, our supply chain is very complex. We are, to start with, we have a presence across 120 countries. We served those 120 countries with more than 4 million POs a year, so purchase orders. We do more than 1 million shipments per year between ocean, air, road, train, you name it. Drones, not yet, but for sure in the future. We deliver in all shapes and forms to remote locations. So we are in the energy sector, and most of the times we need to deploy any type of equipment, being from a pure sack of chemical to a massive tool that will need a special transportation requirement. Apart from that, we also have our own manufacturing centers. So we have, the capability of make or buy. So it's very critical to have supply chain design per se in our ecosystem.
It's a huge challenge. Thank you for sketching that out for us, Nuno. SLB actually began its Coupa journey over a decade ago with LlamaSoft. What drove the evolution to where you are today?
A very good question. We start this relationship, in fact, around 2010, 2011, if I record well. But it was more specific to a niche of market or a geo unit, as we mentioned, and as we say. But then later on, about 3-4 years ago, with the frequency of the disruptions that we have currently affecting the supply chain worldwide, we couldn't be on this, once model per se for a specific unit. So we wanted to evolve and bring the entire supply chain under the COE that we have currently. So basically, short answer is the frequency of the disruptions that we have today. If you think about, let's pick up Brexit, then COVID, then geopolitical conflicts, then trade wars and port strikes and all of that fun stuff. The frequency is so much bigger than what it was in the past that we identified this collaboration with Coupa as the way to go in order to address all these disruptions. I mean, I divide this in 3 buckets, if you like. End-to-end visibility. So how can we identify bottlenecks, for example? How can we identify lack of performance? The other bucket being enhanced efficiency and agility. And last but not least, that it's very new to us as well, is risk identification or score. Then we can address the mitigation. So those are the 3 buckets that we are currently evolving in order to mitigate the disruptions, as I mentioned.
Yeah. Just want to
add. Go ahead, please. If you could
go ahead.
No, you were going to say something?
Yeah, sorry. I was just one thought came to mind based on what Nuno was saying is the kind of journey that he's describing is very similar to the journey that we are seeing with many of our customers in terms of having started off with kind of a more localized model which solves a particular use case, and then realizing that this is a kind of a more of a muscle that you need to build. It's helping you make decisions in a faster manner, in a more optimal manner, and then expanding that and really building out a broader model that can solve a host of problems, and eventually getting to a stage where you have established a center of excellence, and a center of excellence is now integral to your company and is a trusted member of your team. So in the case of Nuno and many of our other customers, the supply chain design center of excellence ends up being a trusted advisor to whom the business comes and asks them to solve problems in a very proactive manner.
Again, for an extremely complex supply chain. I mean, yeah, these are common goals, but how common is it that a company has this broad a need to scale that solution so broadly? Okay, so Nuno, I think, at the basis of every supply chain, every effective supply chain, it is all about data, is it not? And it seems like you're going to need lots of good, clean, and accurate data to make these key decisions. So how did you go about building out your own data governance?
It's a very good question, and I think it's probably one of the most or the most asked questions that I get in different webcasts or presentations. I mean, like you said, it's no secret. Data is the most valuable commodity in the modern era. We understood the importance of the data, and in fact, and for the community that I think our listeners, data is probably 60 to 80% of what we do, right? So at the beginning, we try within the company other avenues to support on the data side. So we have, like many other companies, we have different sources of data, being from the transportation or logistics side, from the sourcing side. So we are now different from anybody else. I think we have common challenges. So we try different avenues to get that data, and then we quickly realized that we needed to take control on centralizing the data. So we created a data cube with all the elements that we need for our models. That obviously didn't eliminate the errors that we will still find, but will give us visibility and independence on getting into that data. So we took control on centralizing the data, and then regarding the quality of the data, the only thing that I can say is that you should start modeling no matter what. Don't wait for perfect data to start modeling, because one of the first deliverables of supply chain design is precisely to give visibility, including quality of the data. So a lot of times we go back to our stakeholders saying, this is the solution that the model is giving, and they will debate and say, no, that's not possible. And then we say, well, it is possible because it's based on the data that we received. So it's good. I'm not saying that obviously it's better to have clean data, but do not wait for the perfect data to start modeling. Otherwise, you will never start. Like I said, identifying gaps on the data is, I will say, the first deliverable of any supply chain design model.
Nari, I imagine that squares with what you tell your other clients too. That sounds like good advice just across the, across the spectrum.
Absolutely, yes. I think the key point here is that the data that is needed for supply chain design, a lot of data comes from ERP systems, can come from planning systems, but there's also some level of really strategic data that's needed, which doesn't reside in those other systems. For example, if I'm going to start a new plant or I'm going to introduce a new product, oftentimes the first time that data gets added is at the supply chain design stage, because those are types of decisions which are strategic decisions which can involve significant capital expenses, can involve a high amount of spend, and you are trying to make the decision of where to manufacture the product or what type of product you are trying to manufacture and so on. So this process of creating this data itself is very iterative, in the sense that, like the example which Nuno gave, you make some assumptions, you run the plan, and then you show the results to the business stakeholders. Then they provide you inputs on whether it's feasible or not, and so on. And as a result, you go back and change the data. So it's a very iterative process. And we provide a framework for being able to do it and conduct that in a very systematic manner, so that as you go forward, the process becomes more and more automated. So the companies which are really doing well are the ones which are able to kind of automate as much of those steps as possible, so that the process of creating the models become less labor intensive and more focus is on making decisions.
Well, help me understand the bigger picture here. Maybe I could ask both of you this, maybe starting with Nuno. What are the factors you see that are actually contributing to the vulnerability in today's supply chains that we're talking about today? Nuno, what do you see out there as the big ones?
So I will say geopolitical instability. If we look at trade wars and the conflicts that we have, being in Ukraine, Middle East, with a great escalation more recently, I'll say that's probably number one, but also climate change in terms of natural disasters. If, when we try to see how can this affect a global supply chain, well, very easy. If I give you the example that, for example, Panama Canal has been having problems due to the level of the water, right? So that alone tells you that, climate change has a huge influence on one of the biggest, traffic points per se on the ocean side. And the last one that I will mention, and since we talk about data, is cybersecurity threats, right? So, again, is the biggest commodity, so obviously it will have a big appetite for strange elements to interfere with your data, right? So those are the three that probably I will put on as my major ones.
Nari, does that square with what you see across your entire client base?
Yeah, I think I would say so. And the result of these kind of issues that are happening is, the challenge in terms of meeting the financial objectives. On the customer side, it's not as if the customers, if you kind of go and look at more consumer-oriented industries like retailers and CPGs and so on, there is a vulnerability in terms of the customer profile itself or the customer buying habits. More focus on, for example, if you go and look at food and beverage, which is a big area of focus for us, the interest in organic food or different kinds of more healthy food, focus on having ingredients which are fresh, things like that, which are adding additional challenges to supply chains, compounded by the fact that there is inflation, so increasing the cost base of your supply chain. So I would say every industry has got different nuances, and demand side fluctuations or demand side challenges are also very critical for us to look at.
Yeah. Well, it's all well and good to bring all these technology solutions to bear on this situation in which vulnerability of supply chains is a big deal. But you know what? It's still going to come down to people. How do you encourage your team to stay adaptive and resilient through change? Nuno, what do you guys do on that score?
So very simple. We put them at the table. We make them understand that they are part of the solution. So I encourage all my team members to, present, be part of the solution, be at the table, and getting the recognition from the stakeholders that they are valuable. We have now the stakeholders asking for, modular A, B, or C to be present at every solution to any problem that they want to solve. So that's how we keep the team motivated, obviously with training as well. But I think the most powerful thing to say is having them feeling that they are part of the solution, that they have a stake, they have a spot on the table. That's I think the most powerful thing that they feel.
Great advice. Nari, what about you? Do you have other examples you might share with us of your customers who have managed to stay adaptive and resilient?
I think that's really the hope and the aspiration of all of our customers. And frankly, they have been very challenged in recent times. And we are trying to help them in terms of that journey of providing early visibility to disruptions and how you can manage those disruptions. One example which comes to mind is for example, we have a customer in the roofing industry who is facing a significant demographic shift in terms of movement of population to the southern part of the United States. So more housing happening in that area versus other parts of the country. Then layer in top of it the interest rates of the mortgages which are present to resulting in reduced home purchases. But then that's kind of a negative impact on demand. But you think about a positive impact on demand for them would be all of these weather issues which are happening because of hurricanes and so on, which is resulting in both commercial and residential roofing changes which are happening. So it's a very complex environment where there are changes to their supply, which is happening in terms of supply constraints because of increase in cost of goods sold and changes in the demand because of all of these factors that I mentioned. And they're trying to balance those aspects of the changing supply and the changing demand, trying to being more adaptive and resilient. So that's just one example of a company in the roofing industry, and we can go on and on.
Yeah. Well, a great example, but it's all about results. These are all great aspirations we have about achieving these goals, but when it comes down to it, what are the actual results? And for that matter, Nuno, can you enumerate a few use cases at SLB where you have actually managed to drive measurable value?
Yeah. So, for example, sourcing strategy using the network optimization model per se, we are able to identify to different portfolios what is the best sourcing strategy. Meaning, client or country A should receive product X from country 1, 2, 3 instead of the country on the other side of the world. So we define that sourcing strategy, and we see value on it because we measure, for example, it's a recurrent exercise that we do, and we see that the value that we found in the beginning when we start this cadence was big, and then has been coming down, meaning that there's less and less to optimize. What is a good thing? Let's not forget that supply chain design, and that's another important aspect. It's not only about savings and optimizing. It's also about letting us know that we are doing the right thing, right? So by seeing that optimization value or let's say cost saving being less and less, is telling us that we are doing the proper thing. And measuring. So that's one example. The other example, we do also transportation optimization for fleet sizes on different units from all those countries that I mentioned before. But I would like to mention one that didn't attract a lot of value. Well, it did in some aspect in terms of sustainability, but it was interesting because not only we associate supply chain design to move goods, right? And what we did was thinking out of the box and in fact using transportation optimization, that's the other model of the tool, to optimize the movement of people. So we move 400 people a day in Colombia, in Bogota, due to the traffic situation that is chaotic. So we have some transportation moving people back and forth. And we help the local team on telling them how many buses they should have and what routes to do to move people. So it's always an example that I give because it's, again, don't think about, only move boxes. This can have a bigger scope than what we normally think in terms of supply chain.
That's a great point to make. Thank you for that. So Nari, you laid out for us very succinctly the aspects of what you consider to be an adaptive supply chain: anti-fragile, integrated, optimized. And yet, how far along is your customer base in terms of achieving those objectives?
That's a great question, Bob. I would say they are at varying stages in each one of those areas because some of those are things within their control. How do I integrate my cross-functional groups within my company is something which is in my control, but external factors, geopolitical factors are not. So I can give you a few examples, right? So and to kind of go back to the point which Nuno mentioned, if you think about optimized as one of the buckets of being adaptive, you're not just optimizing your physical goods, you're also optimizing your human resources. For example, a semiconductor manufacturer is going to use Coupa for the purpose of optimizing their testing process. And the testing process includes not just testing equipment, it also includes human testers. So that's one example. Another example of a customer who has implemented Coupa for transportation optimization, and they are like a consolidator, a third-party logistics provider who consolidates volumes across multiple customers. And the business problem that they are facing with is, how do I consolidate the volumes into my trucks so that I reduce wastage in volume within my trucks while simultaneously addressing the service level requirement of all of the customers. So that's a very, I would say, more of a tactical problem, not a very strategic problem. But this concept of optimization can be used for solving such tactical problems as well, so that they can really focus on. In fact, it's also a sustainability thing. If I'm reducing the amount of volume wasted in my trucks, I'm actually reducing my carbon emissions as well. So that's what I would encourage everyone to think about is look into each one of those three buckets and see ways by which you can improve. And if you make improvements in each one of those areas, the 1+1 can actually be 3 because of the cascading effects of the changes that you're making in each one of those areas.
Excuse me, though, if I keep wanting to harp on this idea of the actual results that come from this. No, Nuno, maybe tell me a little bit more about how you go from the insights we're talking about here to actual execution across the organization. What does the setup look like? And what these tools that create scenarios are great, but how do you actually execute on them?
Well, first of all, Bob, I will say the tool solves the scenarios. People create the scenarios, right? So the modelers, along with the stakeholders, they create the scenarios. But well, the setup, we have three different approaches, right? We have a la carte per se. So that's in fact our majority of the projects that we have today, right? Well, we'll have a stakeholder coming with a problem to solve. We then assign a team along again with the stakeholder. We assign a team from the COE. We go through the process is map baseline. We validate the baseline with the stakeholder because we all need to remember that if a baseline, if you want what you want to solve is not properly validated, then you're going to build up on error per se. So that's the first approach: validate baseline. Then from the baseline, we optimize baseline, meaning okay, without doing nothing, this is what you without spending, let's say, any money, without changing the world, this is what you can do better. And then we start modeling scenarios and validate each step of the way, having the green light from the stakeholder. So that's the first approach, a la carte, like I said. Then we have this recurrent modeling that was we already found value, like the one that I was mentioning before for our products. So we do this on a cadence, being every quarter, every 6 months, depending on what the business line that we are talking about. And we are now moving towards what will be optimal is the prescriptive modeling, meaning identifying, the gaps by not even having anybody to come to us, right? That's what we are working towards too. So then going to the execution phase. At the beginning, was not everything perfect. We failed, and obviously, and I encourage anyone to, model. Model is lesson that you learn, any model that you do. So at the beginning, there were doubts when we start the journey, but now the confidence is so high on what we do that the execution is very, seamless. So we present the results. We say, this is, your best option for whatever objective that we are modeling, being risk, being cost, being lead time, inventory, whatever is the case. And we have now reached a maturity level that our stakeholders take our results, go to their team and implement the suggestions that we gave them without too many questions asked. Like I said, was always like that? Obviously not, but with time and seeing the results that we were delivering, now it's a more seamless process.
So, Nuno, what are some of the lessons that you've learned from your technology implementations that you could share with your audience today?
So look, we talk about data for sure. I will say take ownership of having the data centralized, guiding the flows as you like, centralize the data, create automations as Nari mentioned, very well so. So it's quicker to model. Big one, partnership with your tools provider. In our case, is Coupa. I think it's very important. Once you have a say on the product itself, the tool itself, on what this should do, make this adjustment, this is missing and not. We've been doing that with Coupa for some time now, and it's been working very well. So that is my other suggestion. Commitment for upper management, definitely. It's not easy to start. And I got that. I mean, when we started, We got to a very complex model, but it was one with visibility. Again, if people ask me, should you start with such a complex model with lack of experience? I will say no. But in the end of the day, there's no perfect start, right? So
Yeah.
we started, but has visibility, so we can have commitment for upper management. This is the way that we want to go. This is a journey that we want to take. And then, like I said, any model is a lesson learned. Model anything. If you have bandwidth, model it. Okay, we didn't apply, we didn't go anywhere with it. You gain experience. That's probably my biggest advice, to be honest. We are now close to, I think this year, we should be close to 75 models. And a lot of people tell me, how can you do 75 models with the size of we have today? It's 4 modelers. The COE is like 5 people. And I say, well, because we model things that is like takes a week to model. We model things that takes three months to model, but we model anything we can to gain experience, because one day you will apply that experience and you take the benefit of it, right? So those will be my advices to the audience.
Okay, so how do you take these the design processes which are supply chain focused, and how do you fit that together with sourcing and procurement, which is really important because that's an early part of the supply chain to consider?
Yeah, so very good question, and in fact, it's been a battle, a personal battle in supply chain in my company, along with upper management. We are pushing very hard, especially this year. One of our goals is to have the supply chain design embedded as a fundamental part of the S&OP process to all businesses. So to some extent, and I already alluded to that before, we already are doing our part of S&OP to some portfolios, but not to the entire company, because as you saw in the beginning with all those numbers, it's very complex. And I mean, I don't think that we'll get there, but eventually what we want is to do as much as possible, be the part of the S&OP process to as much as possible portfolios that we have, right? So that is our goal. That's how we want to embed, sourcing, procurement, and supply chain design together.
But again, it's all about collaboration internally and with your supply chain partners. Maybe Nuno, you could help share with us a real example of this collaboration we're talking about today. Like as in the end-to-end approach that we're talking about that's so important here.
So the good example that I have, I gave it already, was this sourcing for a portion of our chemicals of our portfolio that we help sourcing and procurement defining the sourcing strategy for each country. Where should they get their supply from? Take into consideration everything, the geopolitical constraints, the capacity constraints, in such a way that we will achieve an objective. Being the objective, cost, obviously 9 out of 10, but sometimes is sustainability, sometimes is lead time, so sometimes is service level. So depending on the objectives, we are pretty much already embedded on that specific portfolio on this cadence of collaborating with procurement and sourcing. But I will give you another one, just because we mentioned that one already. For example, our spare parts. We are every 6 months, we run an optimization for where. So we have different hubs across the world. We have for spare parts, we have 3 major hubs, and we identify where to put specific spare parts for what countries in that hub and what stock levels. So that's another collaboration that we have with especially with the planning team on what countries should be served from which hub and which inventory levels should we have for each part, buy to stock, or BTS as we call, should we have per part. So that's another collaboration exercise that we do currently.
All this talk of data, though, Nuno, and this talk of complexity in your supply chain, well, naturally, the first thing that springs to mind these days is artificial intelligence as an enabler of that stuff. I understand SLB has been an early AI adopter. How are you approaching the rollout of this particular technology?
So again, I go back to collaboration with Coupa as a partner. So I don't see, and that's the way that we approach relationship. I don't see Coupa as being just a supplier to us as a partner, and I think it's the same take from them. I raise up my hand all the time to be the guinea pig, and that's what we are doing. We are working together to understand what is the current capability that they have already, but also testing it and collaborate and how to extract the full potential. So we are all in early stages. Obviously, you cannot afford to not be on the front row of AI. I think that's obvious, and the way that this is going to evolve or is evolving, it's tremendous, right? The speed that is evolving is tremendous. So the way that we are approaching is just working together with Coupa in this case to develop and take the full extract of what we can from the AI capability.
Okay,
I don't
well,
know if Nari wants to add anything to it, but that's how I see it.
It's very interesting because, first of all, I'd like to move into the audience question and answer session at this point because we do have a number of audience questions coming in. I also encourage audience members to continue to submit your questions while we're answering what we already have, and we'll get to as many of those as possible. The reason I say just about on the AI thing is it just so happens that we actually do have an audience question coming in that I think would be directed to Nari. And then he's asking about what are some of the tech advances in AI that supply chain professionals have to be aware of from the Coupa perspective. So Nari, talk about AI from how you see it.
Oh, yeah. I think that's very, very relevant. So there's a lot of discussion about the generative AI, and generative AI has some good use cases that we have implemented, such as, being able to look at all of the knowledge that we have gathered in terms of how to build models and how to create certain scenarios and things like that. So based on what has been done in the past, educating the more of a novice user or a intermediate user, guiding them on how to use the tool. So that's something which is, I think, a pretty simplistic use case. I think the next step in the evolution is that's where I think it's going to become really interesting is mathematical reasoning, where one of the challenges that somebody like Nuno and others face is answering the question why. Like, why has the optimization selected this plant for manufacturing this product? And sometimes that decision may seem counterintuitive. It may go against the grain of what has been done in the past. That's where oftentimes there is always a creative friction that happens between the supply chain design team and the business team, because the business team tells that, hey, we have never done that in the past. This is the way that we have done our processes. And the ability to mathematically reason and really kind of tell you why, I think that would be very powerful. It'll bring more people together. It's going to help guide your sales and operations planning process to be a lot more cohesive and really help decision making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good point. What you don't want is a black box, quote unquote, either in your AI system or in collaboration between people. So thank you for pointing that out. This questioner is asking, is sustainability a key focus for SLB? And as given, of course, that you're a highly global company, Nuno, is that in fact the case?
Well, absolutely. I will tell you on short how important it is. Almost 3 years ago, our company went through rebranding, passing from Schlumberger, as most of the people probably will know us, to SLB. This was not only a change on name. This was, in fact, rebranding marked as a strategic shift from being a pure, oilfield service company to positioning ourselves as a global tech company focused on energy innovation and decarbonization. The new logo, in fact, if you look us up, you will see the new logo is kind of a graphic. In fact, is giving the visual on the company's evolution and its role on the energy transition, and also representing by when we want to be carbon neutral. So I think that is a strong message from upper management on how committed we are to sustainability. How do we translate that on supply chain design? Any supply chain design model that we do has a CO2 tag or a carbon emission tag attached to it, to each scenario. So when people choose, I want scenario A instead of scenario B, they will know what impact that has, not only on the cost, lead time, inventory, whatever is the case, but also on the CO2. Obviously, are we already on a perfect place to show, exactly the CO2 emissions from all our facilities and on the models, Not, but at least on the logistics side, we are. And we give that visibility. So people have an informed decisions and objectives, by the way, on sustainability.
More about AI. Apparently, this is a big concern with everybody there. The question is, talk more about the cost of not paying enough attention to this, of saying, I'm not going to, get on board with AI. What is the price of that, Nari?
I think the price would, and I think the answer depends on the nature of the company, right? If you're a larger company, global company across multiple divisions, facing different challenges in different geographies, it's hard to do your planning and design without the level of productivity that AI brings to you. Of course, companies have been without AI, and in fact, let me clarify. Those companies which are using Excel versus companies which are using supply chain design tools, they're already using AI, in my opinion, in the sense that traditional optimization, linear programming types of methods is one type of AI. Now, what we are now doing is we are adding a layer of generative AI capabilities, which is improving the productivity of the users a lot more. I would say the cost of inaction is essentially losing market share because your competitors are going to do it and they are going to win against you.
This question references the latest flavor of AI that we're hearing a lot about these days, and that is agentic AI, the use of so-called AI agents to perform discrete tasks within your supply chain autonomously. They're asking, what is the focus of this broadly in supply chain? Nari, could you address that?
Sure. And I can tie it back to the previous discussion that we had about that's kind of basic knowledge agent, then followed by this concept of a reasoning agent. And then we go to the next level is basically an autonomous agent. Like an autonomous agent could be an agent which is running and looking at all kinds of disruptions that are happening externally, like for example, being and looking at news streams and identifying that, okay, there is a challenge that's happening, like a weather event that's happening in Texas. Okay, what's going to be the impact of this on my supply chain? Being able to autonomously make a change in your model and run the model and run a scenario. I would say that's more aspirational today, but I think that's the evolution that we are making.
Okay. No, this questioner is obviously acknowledging the fact that you are a big company with a complex supply chain, as we said at the top of this presentation. But this is a questioner who is a mid-sized company saying, will this technology help us as well? What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. It all depends what do you have to gain with it, right? The mid-sized company, but in terms of supply chain, what is the complexity, right? I cannot, it's a bit of a generic question. In my point of view, my first answer is yes. This will help for sure a mid-sized company. It's more how complex is the supply chain. Can be a mid-sized company with a very simplistic supply chain that, in the end of the day, does it need the investment? Probably not. So it all depends on the complexity of the supply chain, I will say. Not so much on the size of the company, but what portion of the supply chain complexity has an influence on the optimization of that mid-sized company, right?
Good to know, because a lot of smaller companies might say, well, we don't have the resources that you as a big company have, and yet that's not necessarily an obstacle here. The questioner is asking, again, Nuno, how do you even get started to do this type of scenario analysis that you're doing today?
So I'm going to talk from my perspective, obviously. Obviously, that the first approach is people. We needed people with because they are the hands on deck. It doesn't matter if you have the best tools in the world, but if you don't have capable people with the right skills, then you will lose value on the tool. Having said that, for example, we had an hybrid approach that we had people that knew the company inside out instead of in terms of systems, data, mixing with experiencing modelers. So that was a big plus for us in our case. Aside from people, next block is processes, right? So we put the right processes in place and governance, going back again, data, creating the data cube, centralizing, automating, all of that fun stuff, and create a process, a handbook per se. In fact, a handbook, we do have a handbook that says, this is the approach, this is the first step, second step, this is what is needed to achieve the goal. So very important also, so people, especially on our size, people understand clearly across the globe how everything works. Then technology. So for our size, we couldn't use Excel. Excel is as good as it is for certain problems to solve, but it will not be good enough. So, but again, it goes to the point that I mentioned before, any technology, it will be as good as the data that you put on. And the last block obviously will be data for me. So people, processes, technology, data. Without the data, accurate data, or going through that roller coaster on cleaning the data, you will not have the results that you should have. You're going to have it's garbage in, garbage out, as the saying goes, right?
Yeah, we keep coming back to data, don't we? I mean,
Yeah,
for real
absolutely.
estate, it's location, location, location. For supply chain,
Yes,
it's data, data, and data.
absolutely.
So thank you for
Absolutely.
hammering that home point, hammering home that point for us, Nuno. It's really important to get good data to make your supply chain design work. Boy, this has been a great discussion, and there are so many more questions out there that we're not going to have time to answer, and I apologize for that. I'm sure that our experts here would be happy to engage with our audience offline for any questions that we did not get to today, subsequent to the conclusion of this presentation. We do, however, have time for one final question. I'll direct it to both of you, but I'd like to start with you, Nuno. With everything that's happening out there geopolitically, what is one strategic change you've made recently to adapt to this all?
It's difficult to mention one, but I will say, risk assessment for sure. So we are more and more embedding a risk score in the models that we do. On the contingency plans will have a risk score attached, so people understand clearly what are the trade-offs between risk, cost, lead time, and so on. And also diversification, and I think we mentioned this before, diversifying your supply chain as much as possible so you can have the alternatives, because it doesn't matter if you don't have a diversified supply chain, then you don't have alternatives where to go to, right? So you are on your bottleneck per se. So instead of one, I will give two. Obviously, is risk assessment for sure. That's what we've been working now very closely with the other parts of the organization, and diversification of the supply chain.
Noah, what would be your perspective on that? A strategic change made in order to adapt?
Yeah. I think the common theme that we are seeing is scarcity of resources, increase in uncertainty. So the way to tackle those, and again, the need to make trade-offs, right? Trade-offs across multiple decisions. So the real focus of a combination of AI and optimization, I think that's an area where I think there's a lot of opportunity for us as solution providers to work on and help solve real life business problems. Move this away from theory to practice is really what we are trying to do. Help solve customer problems. You leverage our heritage in optimization. We have been doing it for a couple of decades. Marry it with all the latest practical opportunities available to us with AI, and then help solve customer problems.
I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the underlying theme of this last hour is adapt or die. We've heard a lot today about what an adaptive supply chain really is, the elements of that in general from Nari and the specific experience at SLB of Nuno. I want to thank both of you for the fantastic presentation and audience as well for sitting in and asking your own great questions. Thank you for that. Here is an asset for you all. This is a white paper from Coupa, 6 strategies for building an adaptive supply chain. There's a QR code for you to take a shot of right now. If you don't have time to do that in these final few seconds, don't worry about it. This will be sent to all attendees of this presentation upon its conclusion, which of course is right now. Thank you again, Nuno Andrade and Nari Viswanathan. Thank you, audience. Everybody, stay adaptive and have a great day.